about the American Rescue Plan, the workshop to order. And I'm going to, again, given the time frame, I could kind of give a little overview, but I think we all know what we're talking about here, and just want to get into the substance of it. And so I will turn it over to Ryan O'Connor, and I know that Alex Kutza is also, the CFO, is going to be providing information on this as well. So Ryan, take it away.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon. I'm going to pull up a brief presentation that I also tried to make sure you all had available to you, and I sent out a bit ago that you can use as reference leaving here. We'll make sure it gets posted with the materials as well. I'll kind of lead the backbone for the discussion here to set up a framework, and then Alex will jump in the middle to provide some more context on what we as Ramsey County specifically are doing and how we're working with other counties and municipalities as well. So let me start this. Okay, thank you. So a couple pieces today. We're going to talk a little bit about the bill in its entirety. Want to talk specifically then about Ramsey County's direct allocation coming from the American Rescue Plan. We'll probably refer to it as ARP or ARP as we go. And the goal today is more around discussion on the broad principles as we think about developing our funding priorities for the bill. I know you've all received many, many inquiries, thoughts, ideas, sales pitches around how to invest Ramsey County's direct allocation. We as staff have been receiving the same. The things we try to think about a lot are, one, the money has not been deposited in our bank account right now. And so there is a little bit of time on our side to remember that. Two, there are other parts of the bill that have been deployed faster, and we need to think about how those pieces time and complement the work here. And three, we do not anticipate another large infusion of money after this going forward. And so this is both about recovery and response, and we don't feel like we're going to get multiple shots at it to do the work to the extent that we want to. A little bit about the plan. I don't think this is going to be new to most of you, so I'll move quickly. 1.9 trillion. It's both about immediate needs, but also the resulting impacts. Equitable recovery and resilience is a big mention in the bill. It's a key component for the county as we think about our work and how to prioritize recovery. There's some highlights here in the bill of a number of items. Alex will touch on specifics some today as we're looking at how we track everything, but the economic impact payments, child tax credit, the money in the state and local recovery fund is the direct payment to counties, capital projects, different things for homeowners and renters, and then there's a number of other items as well. Specifically on the piece about 350 billion that flows to state and local governments, Ramsey County anticipates receiving just under $108 million. This is one-time money, meaning you get it, you can spend it, but it's not planned to be replenished on the back end. Half we expect to receive soon, and then half 12 months later. So it's really 53 and a half or so, 53 and a half or so is what we see. The money can be spent outwards until December 31st of 2024, which is helpful. We live in biennial budget cycles here anyway. We'll be doing the 2022-2023 budget, and this funding will carry with us beyond even that period of time. We have additional guidance we're expecting from the U.S. Department of Treasury. I believe the date is April 26th. So we're coming close to where some of that guidance will soon be published. And so everything we say today is our best knowledge of what we know. I want to thank NACO, AMC, our county partners. People have been getting good information out as it comes available. It's just still incomplete. As we think about the formula we're working on, it's not meant to be, some complex formula, but as the way we think about it, there's the direct Ramsey County allocation, which is about 108 million, plus X, which is all those other parts of the bill, equals the total coming to Ramsey County. And we're trying to frame up how do we make sure that Ramsey County total is as large as possible to support this community. Whether the money comes to Ramsey County or directly goes to Ramsey County residents or businesses matters not to us. It's about the massive impact to Ramsey County as a whole that we are trying to work on. So as we dive into the planning and approach, here are some of the guiding principles we've been trying to think about. trying to learn as much as we can about all of those funding streams that are not in the direct allocation to counties has been a big priority. Listen to what community has been telling us through the equity action circles, through the town halls that have been conducted through the past year. There's been a lot of work already in community stepping forward and saying, these are things we hope you are able to help and be a part of. These are things where we're hoping you can help empower us, right, as a community. So how do we continue that conversation and also learn from all of the great work already been done? That's been a big part already and will continue to be. St. Paul and St. Paul Public Schools are also receiving significant infusions of federal aid at the same time. The city of St. Paul received approximately $175 million in their direct allocation. The schools have a slightly different formula through their pots of money, but they are receiving an equivalent or slightly larger sum as well. And we are meeting on Friday, we being Alex and I, with our counterparts in those jurisdictions to continue to talk about opportunities for alignment. I don't want to leave out the other cities and school districts. The funding amounts are just significantly smaller as you leave the largest jurisdictions, but there is money flowing to other jurisdictions in the county as well. And the Policy Advisory Subcommittee on Financial Implications has continued to meet to try to track and help follow that work as it goes. We want to recognize that what we know now will be different than what we know in 12 months. If you think back 12 months, we think about that as we go. And so we're really focusing the direct allocation initial priority discussion today on this first amount of funding more so than the second. Although as we get to what we'll call tier 5, the most transformative level here in this presentation, those are priorities that should stay with us through the run. They're not the immediate on the ground need today. And so there should be some level of looking ahead with some flexibility built in to adjust. Inequities mattered before and during the pandemic, and this focus on equity needs to be centered in our response and recovery. And we want to pay attention to the potential for additional federal funding. I specifically call out infrastructure here, and it's going to be mid this summer, but that has a significant opportunity for us as we go ahead.
Okay, before we move on to Alex's presentation, I'm wondering if there are any questions from commissioners regarding the first, kind of just the overview of ARP. Not seeing any hands, so we'll move on then. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, commissioners and Ryan. I'm going to talk a lot more about the X, as Ryan mentioned. Overall, we have a $1.9 trillion bill, which is historic and important that we think about our entire community and how we leverage those funds for our community. So federal relations, our government relations team and I have been working on a matrix that kind of outlines everything in the bill. First, though, I want to think about what's coming to the state of Minnesota because they're a big partner in this for us. And I'm just going to share my screen here. The Minnesota Management and Budget put together a slide. Let's see, can everybody see that? Yep, okay, great. So their slide outlines $8 billion of funding coming to the state of Minnesota. This doesn't include either MDH money for vaccines and public health, and it also does not include homelessness. I'm not 100% sure why not in this particular slide, but they're also getting other funding. My guess is that it hasn't all been allocated out and we don't know the exact amounts. So that being said, you can see here, there are huge groups of money, areas that they're going to be receiving funding. The first that I want to highlight is the $2.6 million coming to the state of Minnesota, much like the Ramsey County is getting about $108 million. That dollar amount has yet to be confirmed. But it should be in that neighborhood. So the state of Minnesota will get $2.6 billion for their government response. Then they will get kind of funding for certain areas. As Ryan mentioned, there's funding that's coming out for various areas within the bill. So as you can see, there's a section here about schools that I'm sure our partners in SPPS and the other school districts are paying attention to. There's childcare money, over $500 million coming to the Department of Human Services related to childcare resources across the state. There's also a number of human services programs, low-income home energy assistance, pandemic relief, child abuse, preventative services, family caregiver. They're all listed here. I can send this out later, as well as mental health block grant and substance abuse block grant funding, which is in addition to the regular block grant funding that's provided by the state, and hopefully will provide some opportunities for Ramsey County and others to work in that space. I want to mention, I'm going to stop sharing here for a second and mention before I share our other one, that we have already gotten some funding. So when we talk about the X, we've already received, you all have seen about $3.3 million related to homelessness from the Department of Human Services. That wasn't directly related to ARP funds, but it is supporting our response in that area. We also received $7.2 million for emergency rental assistance, which was a separate piece that was funded through the federal government, and $11 million for small business, which also came from the state of Minnesota. In addition to that, which is going to be coming to the board soon, we have gotten notice of about $3.5 million between public health, vaccine support, FEMA funds, and dislocated worker funding that Ramsey County has received to work on our response. So right now I have 108 plus $3.5 million approximately related to the X, that specific to the ARP bill. So I want everyone to know we're not trying to be slow with our 108 million. We're also understanding that there is money coming to the county related to the most immediate needs in our community, particularly around public health.
Alex,
Yes.
The funds that you referenced as far as housing and the other money that came in, or shelter, I should say, was that from last year? Was that part of CARES, or what are we talking about that we are dealing with here, just with the current plus? How if I put it that way?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I get excited about money, so I probably should have just been a little more clear. So we came forward as part of the larger board ask around the $20 million dedicated to homelessness. There was also, we had gotten some funding from the Department of Human Services that said, okay, we have some money for isolation and crisis response that the Department of Human Services, it was for 2021. It wasn't related to CARES.
Okay.
It was funding from the state. So that was about $3.3 million.
Okay, and I'm just trying to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what money is available to us that we're considering right now. And so, yes, I see that as part of the plus, but I wanted to make sure that we weren't including money that we've already allocated.
Correct.
From other, whether it's part of CARES or wherever it may be coming from. Thank you.
Yep. Great. So we, as Ryan mentioned, we are meeting with our local partners this Friday. We're also scheduling a series of meetings with our state agencies. So I'm working with government relations to meet with MDH, Department of Human Services. I know some of our my EGCI colleagues are meeting with DEED, but we're trying to coordinate some meetings so we can sit down with our state colleagues and say, hey, look at all the amazing work that Ramsey County did with CARES. We have this great evaluation report, and we have a lot of ideas, and how could we possibly partner and work with you to leverage the funding you have to make sure our residents are represented and we're at the table. So in that sense, I'm going to share one more document, and then I'll pass it back to Ryan. This is a draft document that I've been working on with our government relations folks. Ryan, can you see that, or can everybody see that? Yep, great. Okay, so this isn't quite finished, but we're working on it. And as you can see, what this is taking the entire ARP bill and it's breaking it down into areas like direct aid to government. So this first area, you have local aids direct to county. So that's where our 108 million is. And then state aids, when I mentioned that Minnesota is getting $2.6 billion, it's right here. And so then you keep going, and this is a work in progress, but I'm going to share a little bit more. You can see there's very specific funding for example, here's COVID-19 virus response. So public health departments are getting funding, testing, vaccine distribution. We're even tracking things like Medicaid policy that will impact the people that we serve and thinking through what that may mean. The bill actually extends maternal coverage after a baby is born. So there's things like that. FEMA funding. Housing is another big area where there's emergency rental assistance, which we've discussed, housing counseling, homelessness assistance, mortgage and utility assistance. So I wanted to share this briefly to give you a sense that we are tracking all of these, because some of this funding will not necessarily go through the state. It will also go through federal agencies, and we will want to apply directly to them for grants or partner with our community partners to apply. I'll just quickly highlight, we have some early childhood area here with the childcare money I mentioned before. Citizen support, so this is what Ryan had mentioned, like the direct stimulus payments, the unemployment benefits. And then we have food assistance. The SNAP benefits are increasing, they're continuing that increase through September. And there's one more section I want to show, business assistance and the mental health. So like I said, this is a work in progress, and I understand it's not easy to read right here as part of this meeting, but I will share it when we have it more complete. And I wanted to just at least give you a look at what we're working on. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Matas-Castillo and then Commissioner McDonough.
Sorry, Jim was up first. I'll let him go.
Okay, I was going to say I didn't know who went first, so you have to be first. Commissioner McDonough.
Thank you. I'm not sure if I'm seeing it on here or if we are, and it's kind of like the two areas, but on your big slide with all the state money, you had the urban transit. I'm assuming that's the money that's going directly to Met Transit. I'm not sure if I'm seeing some of the housing money that's coming through home and CBDG and entitlement and public housing to Met Council, there being the Metro HRA. And I'm not sure if I'm seeing that, or if, and I haven't seen that, you're recognizing that that is another partner here that is going to be having some direct allocations, especially on one of the areas that we're really focused in on. And I just want to make sure that's on our radar here, because I think they're going to be seeing a pretty sizable amount of money coming through them as the Metro HRA.
I was looking at Ryan in case you wanted to mention something. Thank you for the question, Commissioner McDonough. You are right that that particular piece of housing funding is not on this spreadsheet. Again, I've tried to follow up with MMB to see what was and wasn't on there. And I do absolutely, we need to partner with Met Council and think about how we work with them and leverage that funding on both transit and on the housing front.
And then just to clarify, so the Met Transit money was listed as a state allocation. You weren't calling out Metro, because they're getting that directly as the owner operator of a transit system. And I'm not quite sure how they're getting their housing money, but I think that's coming to them directly too. It's not coming through MHA. They'll get their own pot of housing money, but my understanding is Met Council will get their own pot of housing money through their Metro HRA.
Thank you for the clarification. And you are correct. And also on this list, this was more to talk about broadly what money is coming into the state of Minnesota, because they do have the local government funding on here, which will come directly to us, but it is benefiting Minnesotans. So it's kind of a mix of things that's going to the state and items that are going to like the Met Council and to local governments.
Thank you.
Well, and it sounds like having the Metropolitan Council with both of those funding options, having that delineated there would probably be helpful. Commissioner Matas-Castillo and then Commissioner McGuire.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So do you have any indication on when our other agencies will kind of lay out how they're going to use their funds. I mean, it's a lot of money, and I appreciate all the moving pieces and tracking, but I guess my biggest concern is I don't want to be duplicative if there's plenty of resources going to existing programs that we might receive allocations from the state, but that we're using our allocation to maybe be innovative and creative in a long-term investment. And so, but timing is going to matter on both of those fronts. So just wondering if you have a sense of timing.
Madam Chair, Commissioner Modis Castillo, I think it's varied significantly right now. We've been talking at the Metro Administrators Group about it. I have not seen any other public presentations from counties yet, although Dakota County was prepared to discuss preliminarily last week for the first time. And I don't know if that happened last week for us got upended. So that was one spot. St. Paul began their conversation with their city council this past week, laying out broad priorities in their areas. I do agree on the idea of you need to move fast in some spaces, but in many spaces, strategy needs to trump speed this time around. And what rewards a successful response looks different than with CARES. And so I'll come back to that point if that's okay in some of the final pieces to frame the remaining discussion. But noted, and I don't have a specific timetable from a lot of other counties. They're also trying to take their time a little bit.
Thanks.
Well, and I do think it's important that, and I know that probably it is coming up later in this discussion, is how we're going to be coordinating with all of the other entities that are receiving money, because we don't all want to do it in a silo and then come out and say, oh, look what you're doing and how are we coordinating that? So that's one of the reasons that this tracking of where the money is coming from and what it's to be used for is going to be very helpful in doing that coordination. Commissioner McGuire.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. This is actually the line of questioning that I had, is just what actually Commissioner Modis Castillo and Ryan have talked about, and you yourself, Madam Chair. And thank you, Alex, for that great chart. I mean, that is really going to be helpful. And I would just suggest too, as Madam Chair did, that it'd be nice to see like what's coming through the state directly to us, what's coming through the feds directly to us, what's coming through in regional, as Jim said, to Met Council, then maybe to us. I mean, there are so many moving parts and so many different pots, but that would really be helpful. And I agree, these conversations are going to be so important going forward, that we are coordinated, that we're innovative, that we're using our money for things that other people aren't going to use it for, because we need it to get done, and we'll let them do their piece and we can be creative with our piece. And I just can see many, many conversations, and I just want you to know I'm up for it. I mean, I think we should just meet on this as often as we need to make sure that this money gets spent whenever it needs to get spent. So these are just conversations that are really going to be important, I think, moving forward. So we got to engage all our partners in all the ways that we can. So thanks for starting the conversation today.
Well, and I also think that based on what we did with CARES, that Ramsey County is positioned to be a leader or a model in this. And so I think that we can take that on, because why have everybody else reinventing the wheel? And for counties, each has its own, how it's going to do this, but again, serving as a model. But for some of our municipalities and the school districts, this is new. And so where we can coordinate and assist with that as a model entity, just as we did for CARES and just as we did for the rollout of when we made services remote, and to use that as a way to help move things forward in a very coordinated fashion. Commissioner Carter.
Thank you. Thanks for all of the work that you've done to set up this structure for envisioning how we utilize these resources to best meet the needs from priority or tier 1, I should say, through tier 5, the big swings. And as we're coordinating and making certain that we're leveraging funds from wherever they may come, for your eyes wide open to ensure that we are plugging in all of those sources and keeping track of how they are coming to us and can be used. I know that also there is a marker in the presentation for the potential infrastructure funds that could come forward this summer. And of course, we then have to look at key needs and opportunities as they relate to funds we don't even know about at this point in time, and try to assess what we need to take advantage of today with resources that we know about, and what may be coming forward in the form of the infrastructure package. So that introduces an additional challenge. And if you can talk about where you see that challenge being managed and how you're looking at that as we move forward, I would appreciate that. Anything briefly that we can share at this point in time about leveraging and looking forward to those funds, as they may or may not come.
Well, I think that actually the next section of our presentation here gets into the funding principles, and that may answer some of those questions, unless there's something that you want to highlight right now, Ryan.
Madam Chair,
we move into that and then see if we can come back to this.
Right as we dive in, that's where we're going to go next, and I think that's the goal here in the next half hour.
And we'll come back to you if there's a question after we get through this section. Commissioner Carter, we can come back and address the specific questions. Thank you. Okay, Ryan, are you taking the next section?
I am ready to go. So I'm pulling this back up to finish us on the PowerPoint. Okay, so this is a graph, a picture that got put out a couple of weeks ago. It was not ours, although it tracked very well with how we've been trying to think through and talk about prioritizing funding around the American Rescue Plan and how to think about our overall investment. I want to pause for a second and say thank you to Alex and the entire team. There's been a lot of folks across the county COVID-19 partnership. That's a big chart they've been pulling together to get down to the granular level, because if we do not understand the full landscape, we will miss pots of funding that could have been available. And we feel like it's so important to understand those pieces. But understanding those pieces don't set a strategy, and that's what we're here to talk about with the board today. The overarching piece to that would be, we're going to learn more as we go, but if we have some level of strategy going into it, we can then make decisions as we go that align with that overarching vision. And that's kind of where today's discussion hopefully starts to ground us. You can see 5 tiers in this vision that was laid out here, and they feel like they fit very well for the conversation we're trying to have, which move from immediate relief to the things that can fundamentally shape a stronger, more resilient community. And I think about this a lot when I think back to going around the state and seeing investments that were made coming out of the Great Depression. You don't see the immediate relief that helped people through. That's not to say it wasn't important. It was important, and it's often talked about in history. But what you do see are legacies in positive ways also left from those investments, and that would be toward the tier 5 end, the multi-generational investments. How do we do both? And we should not accept only doing one as we move ahead. To hammer home the point of the first bill required speed to be the marker of success, the CARES bill. I believe ARP, the success of our community will be defined by strategy and the long-term equity goals and resiliency that you can achieve through that strategy. So you can see as we take this, the proposed overarching vision here is to try to work to see that we can invest as much as possible toward tier 5, while truly recognizing you have to make decisions to make investments also in tiers 1 through 4 along the way. But if you never start with the idea of getting to tier 5, you will probably never get there by accident. So I'm going to walk through an initial tier of some priorities that, as we've been talking at the county board meetings, as we've been trying to listen in workshops over the last year, as we think about the initial CARES funding, and we try to sew it together, this tries to lay out a bit of what we see, and it will be on a table at the end as well. So I do reference mostly, we're talking about the $108 million in the direct allocation now. So this is the part of how we think about tiering that funding within the bill. There are some public health needs, testing, vaccines, PPE, building modifications. Now, I'll use this as the only example and I won't go as slow on the others. Alex mentioned there's some public health money coming to us that we just found out about. that reduces the need to spend from the 108 to address this need, which is kind of the goal here as we go, but we know we need to meet this need. Workforce development is an area that is underappreciated or under-supported in the ARP. I'm not here today with specific programming needs, but I am here to highlight we're concerned about youth as we hit the summer in Ramsey County. We're concerned about continued engagement or workers that are no longer even looking for work. And we know we need to make investments in the workforce system in partnership with others. St. Paul is seeking to make large investments in workforce as well. And there's a partnership opportunity that aligns potentially as we go forward in that space. Racial equity and community engagement is not a called out specific pot of ARP funding. It was in Ramsey County's CARES response. I think it should be again here, and I would ask that be a part of the strategic consideration, recognizing that those specific resources that get out and break through barriers around race and culture have made a difference. We got a chance to hear one aspect of that this morning through public health, but you've known many others as we've gone ahead. Employee compensation was specifically called out by President Biden as one of the priorities in the bill. I would say two things. The idea of essential and non-essential county employees is a distinction without a difference. At this point, every employee in this organization has been essential in getting us through, whether you're an accountant who's worked around the clock, whether you're someone in financial assistance or in law enforcement or corrections or anywhere else. I struggle to define who has worked harder than everyone else. It has been a true team effort, and it's a great appreciation to all employees. But as we think about the employee compensation piece, retention and support for employees is as important as like the frontline health definition at this point as we go forward. As more of our employees are vaccinated, there are huge concerns about making sure employees stay with organizations beyond the pandemic as they experience burnout. How do we think about this as a strategic part of our TARP, talent attraction, retention, promotion work as we move ahead? And then funding to complete the emergency shelter fund, the $20 million, we are close, but not quite there. This is a relatively small amount overall of money, upwards of potentially $1 or $2 million is what we're talking about from the last estimate I had, but making sure we have the funding to stabilize the Bethesda operations and others through April of 2022 as we originally had set out to do. In tier 2 and 3, I lumped them together. And the reason why is both fit well in the ongoing process of budget development. How do you avoid conversations around cuts versus services versus innovation at a time where you need service, you need innovation, and you have to find a short-term way to sustain some things during crisis periods? And cuts set you back. How can we use the ARP to help supplement the budget in ways that allow us to supplement service delivery that would not have otherwise been possible? Because it's one-time money, we have to be thoughtful. It's a strategic conversation to have with the board, but we look forward to having that through the budget process as we go forward. Capital building shifts, as our luncheon around building operators and managers talked about today, and the need to change footprints. One-time money allows us to go from where we've been to where we also are hoping to go in the future, and trying to use some of the ARP money to usher the transition from Ramsey County pre-pandemic to Ramsey County post-pandemic, aligned with flexible workplace policies that we are working on right now, become a big part of our work going forward. And just as an aside, we are about to survey every employee in the organization as a part of this flexible workplace policy. We have a survey ready to roll here in the next month that asks very simple questions. What's worked well? What do you hate about this last year? What are you hoping we're going to keep? I look forward to sharing a lot more of that with you soon. As we move to tier 4, up the priorities, this is really the partnership level in so many ways. How do we think about ways to hopefully not use all of our direct allocation, but partner with others? Food and basic needs, childcare supports, financial assistance program changes, violence prevention work. There are many others, you could list them as well. The economic small business ecosystem is a very big example of that. We may have a part to play, but alone we cannot do that work. The ecosystem that we want to create coming out of the pandemic is something that requires a partnership model of development. And then housing stability, as Commissioner McDonough mentioned with the Metro HRA already, many other partners, it requires partnerships, but I'm actually going to roll it into the final tier. I will say, when we sit down and think about what is in front of us and where the crises sit, and what are the crises of our time or our generation, I have to posit that affordable housing supply is the largest crisis that faces the region. And if you want to employ a housing first strategy as a part of stability in people's lives, and so that everyone can feel prosperous and able to grow and thrive in this community, the shortage of housing is a direct barrier to that occurring. It's built over many years. We've always not known where the resources can come to address it. And this is why getting as much as we can to tier 5 feels like it matters. It's not just in Ramsey County, it's a national and a regional issue, but now feels like the time to move beyond conversations about shelter, where we have stabilized through April of 22, and talk about affordable housing units along a continuum to ensure that we can move people out of shelter into long-term supportive housing structures. The last look I had given, this is my own quick number, but 15,000 housing units short in this community, 50,000 across the region. And what it tells us is you cannot live where you want in this community right now based on your income level. And that's something that we talked about the city administrators recently as well. That is the reality in front of us, that we do not get to choose to live wherever we want to live. It is often dictated by where there are available housing units that allow us to make choices to live there. There are so many opportunities to build diverse mixed income communities as we move forward. And we know that diverse mixed income communities are the most resilient communities, and they are the ones that are best set up to weather moving forward. And finally, all of the conversation around housing, there's a big infrastructure conversation that's going to be happening all summer. So anything we do in this space needs to have an eye towards us being a multiplier of the federal government's potential work, because they're bigger than us. They can print money, and ideally the opportunity to be a multiplier with them and be positioned for that is huge. This slide shows how I tiered out that information. If you want to go back at some point and just see them all on one slide, there's nothing new there. It's what we just walked through. Final slide. So looking ahead and setting the stage. The goal today is, as we lay out these preliminary priorities by tier, and we hear from you, we want to make adjustments to what we hear. We hope that we generally hear these are the things you feel like we have been talking about with you all as policymakers for a while. If they're out of step, we would love to hear some of that. We are continuing to engage in conversations with community. County Connections mentioned that today. The EAC is another big group that continues to have value at that governance level and helping shape, taking the recommendations that they've already made, where do they fit well with these priorities, and they do fit well with these priorities. Upcoming CARES funding evaluation workshops, we're going to go through 11 programs that we invested in CARES and do the evaluation findings with all of you. We're going to group them either in sets of 1 or 2 together throughout the month of May and into June, which gives you a chance to get more grounded in what worked and what did not work as well, which helps shape some of this going forward. And then the way we kind of think about it right now, tier 1 RBAs, we may need to do some things on a case-by-case basis and make a case to bring some of them forward because there's an immediate need. Workforce would be one good example. If we can figure out what needs to happen in the workforce space, waiting 3 or 4 months is not a good idea, with summer fast approaching and youth employment as an issue. Tier 2 and 3 are already going to be a part of the budget process and the conversations this summer. How does ARP fit within the 2022-2023 budget? Tiers 4 and 5, I think we're going to need to have additional workshops and conversation. Even if we agree on the general strategy that the board wants to set, let's come back when we can be more specific and we get more of that chart filled in, but at least it gives us a vision of what we're driving toward to start to frame up where we go next. So there is no proposal to ask the board to approve a universal $108 or $54 million funding plan like we did with CARES, where we had to do that. It's instead, how do we develop this strategic outline for the first half of the funding that aligns with the board's priorities and creates a roadmap for the organization and the community. And then we will work on implementation in a multifaceted model after that. Thank you for letting us walk through this, Madam Chair, and we now stand for whatever questions or discussion you may have.
Okay, first I will go back to Commissioner Carter.
Thank you. Can you, yeah, you can hear me. So I really appreciate going through the whole presentation, and forgive me for being a slide ahead of when I began on this question, but I also just wanted to reinforce the manner again in which you have categorized, and also that it is not necessarily prioritized, if you will, in terms of how much money to spend or when to spend what, with the exception of the half and half orientation that would have us looking at 54 million and putting a specific plan together in that regard that we roll out strategically, not necessarily with the speed as we did with CARES. I also want to underscore and support that in that transformative area where we are looking at the opportunity to create a new dynamic for housing, that we don't have enough, there isn't enough, and that we would prioritize that as an area to move forward in, knowing that there is a potential an infrastructure bill could add to that, and adding to it is absolutely what we need. But there are some immediate opportunities that we would want to take advantage of in the short term in that area where we see a definite need and a key opportunity to apply some dollars to aid in the transformation we're looking forward to. So my hand up is really a clapped hand for the emphasis in that area. I also appreciate the others, I could name them, but you've done so in the document, specifically with workforce as a key and more immediate opportunity as well. And partnerships with our communities, because we're not the biggest player in this thing right now. And we do need to look forward to our opportunities to leverage those areas of transformation as well. Thank you.
Commissioner McDonough.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Ryan, Alex, I appreciate this. I think, you've put together a great plan for us. I support this plan. I appreciate some of the check-ins along on this. I know you've been teeing this up with us, as you've been developing it. I really do feel that this is a solid plan moving forward. I think, there's a couple of pieces here that, could provide some risks or some make it stronger, right? And that's, the community engagement piece as we move forward and bringing community into this, but then also the ability to resist blowing in the wind, because we're going to get a lot of pressure to do a lot of things. And we're going to have to be able to say no to a lot of things, but if we can say no because it's tied to community engagement, it's tied to our priorities, and it's tied to this, this tier 1 through 5, meeting immediate crisis needs, but to leave this generational impact that can be seen after we're all long gone is going to be hard sometimes for us to be able to do that. And I just want to call that out. I know I see some shaking of heads here, and people recognize that, but we need to have our eyes wide open to that. And I think, teeing this work up so that we have a plan that is thoughtful, that has buy-in, and we continue to reach into the community and utilize the community and its strengths. But again, there are going to be times when we're going to have to say no, and we're going to have to be able to justify why we're saying no.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, Commissioner McDonough, thank you for that comment. And I just want to add, that's been a piece that we've been talking about, even as we've been thinking it through. The one piece that's been beneficial because we've been working closely with community through the first CARES is the visions laid out here, the conversations happening at the board table, and the conversations that have happened in town halls and with community are generally aligned. I mean, housing was like one of the #1 areas of recommendations. And we look forward to trying to have that like iterative conversation now with community to say, how do we move up from rental assistance and crisis management to the next level, which we have never really maybe opened space for that conversation before, but noted on those comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Bretham.
Thank you, Chair Reinhardt. Just generally, yes, this approach makes sense to me. It's the right direction, I think. And to Commissioner McDonough's point, yeah, there's going to be a lot of people who want to divide this up into ever increasing smaller pieces of pie that don't fill anyone up. So we're gonna have to hold a hard line here about what it is we're trying to do and accomplish. I'm wondering, in terms of that fifth tier and that innovation, the housing. I agree with that. I'm wondering if you can speak to how the efforts around the economic inclusions plan more specifically will inform that. You know, we don't want to rush out and build as much housing right away that hasn't that we're not using that data to really maximize, but we also don't want to delay. So how have conversations gone about that process and integration and how that framework layers on to the housing development piece?
Thank you for the question. Madam Chair, Commissioner Fretham. So that plan is what should drive forward the investment in Tier 5, would be the easiest way to say it. I'm not looking to write another housing plan on the side. What I want to do now is, remember when we said a few weeks ago, we shouldn't let that plan become a plan on a shelf somewhere. I think this is our moment to prove that it's going to be anything but.
Thank you. Commissioner Matis Castillo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the housing piece, I'm just wondering if the funding that we're receiving has a spend by date or is it an allocate, especially when it comes to housing. The timeline is pretty tight to build out a lot of housing, given that some of especially our plan is going to require zoning changes and code changes from our partner cities in order to implement. And so I'm just wondering if it's a spend by date or an allocate by.
Madam Chair, Commissioner, good question. It appears to be a spend by date of December 31st, 2024. That being said, we have not seen any guidance on this outside of the bill itself. And so I want to just take a moment to reiterate that the Treasury is going to be issuing guidance, specific guidance on what these funds can be used for. And then we'll be really creative in thinking about how we can leverage those funds to make sure they're allocated in that Tier 5 area. I'm sure there will be opportunities for housing, but I also think that goes into the infrastructure bill and potential of other kind of braiding funding together to see where we can get.
Excellent. So we should use this as a warning notice to our communities that we need to move fast to implement our plan.
You know, Madam Chair, Commissioner Matis Castillo, the one thing I would add to that is, there's another great article in the New York Times yesterday about zoning and the practice. If you haven't seen it, I would strongly encourage you to take a moment and read it. We know what the solutions are in front of us. The Biden administration has outlined some of them potentially that'll be a part of this infrastructure bill. I don't think it's a need for time to figure it out. I think it's a matter of our will to collectively move on a topic that we are in crisis on. And it will take all of your help as elected officials and across this community to make that happen.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well said.
Commissioner McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well said, Ryan. I think that's something we all can take to heart, that this is not something we need to do any more studying on. We just need to be courageous and do it. And I think we are. I mean, I think we as a county are, I tell people, we're the most courageous county. If we can't do it, nobody can. We are a county that can do this. So I'm just curious what we're thinking about for our policy action groups. You know, we set them up as a more of a emergency kind of thing, you know, to sort of handle the money right away. Now we've got this new money that we get longer. I know that Commissioner Ortega said, you know, that it was the last meeting for the food insecurity. I know childcare policy, we're trying to figure out how to transition into more permanency with the work. Could you just talk a little bit about the policy action groups and how those were set up and what our vision might be for those? I'm just thinking out loud. I'm not sure where I see them going, or I think the child care policy group, I still think there's a need for it for the near future, but just if you could talk about what you think.
Madam Chair, Commissioner McGuire,
Go ahead.
this is just my suggestion. I think we can continue to talk about them, and they're part of the board's feeling of how you want to engage other elected officials during an emergency response. So I don't want to have a unilateral answer, but I would suggest that, similar to Commissioner Ortega's mentioned this morning, of the Food and Basic Needs Group having done a lot of work and finding a way to now embed it within the organizational structure moving forward. The more that structure we can do, the longer it'll be able to live with us beyond an incident management team and that structure. And so for the childcare group, what we see though is a lot of lines in this on funding that aren't even specific to Ramsey County. And the final question needs to be, how does the county in partnership with the folks on that group work to advance the issue and bring money to Ramsey County and beyond? And I don't have a perfect answer for you on that, but that's kind of my preliminary thought.
I appreciate that. I think that's a great answer. And I think it just helps, yeah, all of us think about there's no one right answer. And I love the fact of embedding all this work in so that it's more permanent. But I think you've wisely talked about what's happening with childcare too. Thank you.
Okay, Commissioner McDonough, did you take your hand down? Okay, then I will move on to Commissioner Carter.
Sorry, Ryan did a great job responding to that question, and as this is a board invention, that policy action group and its subcommittees, I just wanted to share my agreement that we would be looking toward those groups as needed to continue, and as operationalized to stand down the larger group. We're looking toward having the sort of meeting that we had at the beginning of COVID, which is inviting all, sharing back information, as it does not appear that that policy group to make separate decisions, or recommendations based on that discussion is needed at this time. But information is always needed. We have different avenues for that information today, but can use that sort of convening over time just to bring everyone in. And then the last thing I'd say is that as we see the need, it could be that we'll draw those groups back together again. I think we need to stay as flexible as that. So I just wanted to add that, but that would be based upon the emergency need and not where we see we're able to operationalize those functions. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Fretham.
Yeah, I'll just jump in on the financial implications group specifically, since that's one that really relates to this information, but also has tended to be a bit different from the other policy action groups, from my understanding, in terms of just the number of staff involved. It is a much smaller staff group in terms of our CFO, Alex Kutza, and our legislative relations, or our government relations staff involved, because it really is more gathering information from our partners and other local governments more directly versus doing more specific coordinated work together. It's an understanding of those positions. And we did meet about a month ago. We're planning to meet again in May. A lot of the cities and the school district that we had in that group mentioned that their conversations like this were going to be happening this month. So for many of us, this is just the beginning of conversations. In terms of calling those meetings, a lot of it has been based on conversations with our staff about, would it be valuable to hear from our city partners at this time? Is there a purpose for us meeting? What are we trying to accomplish, or what are we trying to share out? I think it's certainly worth a conversation, whether there are other forums such as the Ramsey County League of Local Governments, where that work could be happening on a more regular basis, and whether that's a direction we want to move going forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Carter, did you have another question?
No, I'm just having difficulty
Okay.
lowering my hand. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner McDonough.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I know I probably don't need to call this out, but I've learned in the past when I've thought that and I haven't, and then I regret it because it gets missed, right? I want to go back to the issue Trista raised around the Tier 5 and the housing and the impact and the timelines and the spend buys and all that, right? And I don't want to take any pressure off of us. We've got the plan in place. We don't need to spend no more time there. I do not want another workshop with 259 slides on how we're going to do it, right? We've got a good foundation for the community engagement. We've got a good number, Ryan. I think your number of 15,000 is a good number. And I think St. Paul would back it up with the work that they've already done. And I do, it does come down to some of the zoning and some of the NIMBYism and some of the resistance that we've popped up against before. And it is a good time it is a good time to really try to push through some of that stuff in a way that we can maximize this opportunity. But I do want to also call out, and Ryan, I think you and Alex and your team were really good about leveraging. Part of the leveraging here is not to let the time always drive our decision making, right? There are going to be times when we might need to utilize some of this money to move into areas that we could capture that flexible money to put into that pot to help us have this generational impact and be able to be in compliant with the federal rules, to be able to have that impact. And certainly in the past, when we did that, we have an option of, we went with a zero levy increase last year. So we really needed to have a good understanding of where that was coming. Looking to the future, being able to buy some of that flexibility and buy some of that time, I think is going to be just as important in those decisions.
Thank you, Commissioner McDonough. I think that, as I've been listening to what we are doing here, we've talked about the fact that we have more time as compared to CARES. But the fact is we had no time when it came to CARES. So having even twice as much really isn't something that we can sit back and say, okay, well, we've got time to do this. We do have what we need. We've got the basic structure, as Commissioner McDonough has and others have commented on, to be able to leverage through careful planning, community engagement. We've got all of the pieces there. And it's a matter of making sure that we then figure out where the plus that CFO Kutza talked about. We've got the $108 million and how that's going to come in, and then the other funds that are going to come in. And there's likely to be funds that well, I know there's going to be funds that we're not aware of right now that may come into other sources. But I think we've got a good structure to be able to figure out how we can leverage so that we don't have a lot of silos out there. And I think that's going to be important for the rest of the community as well. But that we really can make that systemic change that we know we need in this county, in the cities, and in the state. So I think that we have a good plan in place. I'm hearing support for what has been presented here today, which doesn't surprise me at all. But it's really good to have it reaffirmed by the board because it is in keeping with our vision, mission, and goals. Commissioner McDonough, did you have another comment? That's okay. All right. Any final comments from Alex or from Ryan or any of the commissioners?
Alex, do you have any final comments from where you sit and what you think? Okay. Madam Chair, my final comment is kind of three tangible things that'll happen next, because this is so amorphous right now. That's the other big challenge to some of it. For the vision for Tier 5, that housing supply piece specifically, we need a vision that looks like what we did when we said we need $20 million in an emergency housing account to be able to solve for COVID. It helped us rally around it. It helped us plan to it. It helped us all know the number, and it has been the galvanizing force. And otherwise things bleed on the sides and we're not there. We need to go back and do some work to kind of put together a vision that says, this is our vision for getting what we can into Tier 5 and being okay then with spending some money in 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the right ways as well. So we're going to try to put together a general pie or vision of how this all plays, particularly the first phase of federal funding across these various tiers. But then the other part is I commit to you some level of regular reporting, and I got to talk to Alex to really work out what's going to make sense. But using that spreadsheet we had, like with CARES, we were sharing with you updates. I think we should continue to share updates on what we're learning about what funding is coming in where, because you all hear about things too, and then we can add or modify the list as we go. We need everybody paying attention to it. So those will be our takeaways, the vision side, tightening it up, and the piece around the reporting mechanism. And beyond that, really appreciate helping to shape this vision so we can begin to move forward in conversations.
Well, and I would like the board to note that we have over 50 people in attendance at this discussion today. And I know a lot of staff and a lot of community members, because this is, as we all know, it's a big deal. So, and I want to do a shout out to staff. I mean, there's so many people that are involved in all of these moving parts to make this work for Ramsey County and our constituents. If there are no other comments, then not seeing any, we are adjourned. Have a good afternoon.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good job, Victoria. Great. Good job all. Thanks, Alex. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you so
Tony.
much, all.